Last year, Callaway took the golf market by storm with the release of Paradym. But what does 2024 hold for their driver release? Just before we get stuck into this new review of the Callaway lineup for 2024, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It's totally free to do. Click the button down there so you don't miss out on any tips to help you game, and also some other driver reviews we've got coming out in the next few days. Let's get stuck into this review. So last year we saw the first edition of Paradym come out, and Callaway have decided to stick with the Paradym line of drivers in the Paradym AI Smokes. Now, for years, what we saw from Callaway was that they would alternate between different releases. We would see Epic, we would see Maverick, we would see Epic, then we'd see Mavic Rove, and so on and so forth. But this year sees them stick with the Paradym line. And it makes sense because, like I said earlier, they blew the market away when it came to Paradym. But what does the Paradym AI Smoke have that the Paradym didn't? So this year's line of Paradym sees 4 models as opposed to 3 models. We have the Max, which I would say is probably the average everyday player's driver. We then have the Max D, which is more of your high handicapper, forgiving driver aimed at more game improvement and more draw biased shots. We then have the Triple Diamond, which is your Tour Pro, higher club swing speed, better player driver, lower spinning, longer yardage. We also have another one, the Max Fast, which we actually won't see that much of out in the market, which is a lightweight driver. It's got lighter components and it's designed for that senior player who's struggling with swing speed and really struggling to get any launch or any distance with the driver. But the 3 drivers that I'm going to be focusing on in this video are the Max D, and the Triple Diamond. So has anything changed with the Paradym? Obviously the name has, Paradym AI Smoke has been added onto it now, but are they going to be the same drivers? There are some technological differences in the heads, and also there's some visual differences in the heads as we look at them. The gold colourway and the real sort of blue turtley look on the old Paradyms has changed. That's gone. There are some shades of blue in there, but I would call them more sort of sportier blue instead of a more regal blue. One of the comments that I heard a lot of the times about Paradym were a club that looked like it was made for the Japanese, the Asian market. One of the models that we would see would really fit into those lines, as where these ones look more like a driver that we would see on mass production over here from all the other big companies. There's a sort of greyishy, smoky look to feed in with the name, and then also this blue when it comes to a little bit of the writing and some of the weights. We're not seeing now that the carbon is blue. It's very much gone back to that carbon look, the black look, when we actually look down on the drivers. Technology-wise, I actually want to take these golf clubs out onto the golf course to get a little bit of a feel for them before I dive into the technology, because for me, we've stuck with the same name, bar adding AI Smoke on them. So has anything actually changed in these clubs? Before I read up on what's going to happen with these drivers, I want to see if I can gauge anything when I get out on the golf course. So I headed down to Formby Ladies and also Trafford Golf Centre just to give them an initial hit and just see what I was getting from a sound, what I was getting from a feel, and what the flights were looking like with these drivers before we dive into some numbers later on in the video. We've had our initial hit there out on the golf courses, and there's one driver that is really standing out to me. I won't tell you which one it is yet, but there was one that was a definite change from last year's model. If we just start with the Max model though, as we start, for me, again, this is the one that's going to be the every golfer's driver, aimed at maybe a slightly lower handicapper, a high handicapper, a mid handicapper. This is the one that can fit everyone. The 460cc footprint, the slidable weight that we saw from the old Paradym is there in the back, so you can have more draw and fade bias. It's got the weight up at the face. We have the carbon base. We have a carbon crown. And like I say, this is the one that is going to be for pretty much every golfer. This one, to me, when I was hitting it in terms of a sound and a feel, and a look perspective, it looks very much like last year's model. It sounded a little bit more pingier, sounded a little bit more tingy off the club face. I would say this was the most high-pitched of all the drivers and was the sort of loudest one as I was hitting it. Felt pretty decent, and in terms of flight-wise, it felt like if I wasn't quite striking it, I got pretty decent numbers out of it. It didn't feel the longest of the drivers. It felt like pretty much what it was last year in terms of distance. I wasn't seeing loads of yardage gained. From a toe, a heel, a centre strike, it didn't seem like there was loads of drop off from that toe to heel to the centre. And overall, like I say, probably the driver I would see the majority of golfers aiming towards. When we go into the max draw one, and one thing to note is that last year when I did the reviews, I focused mainly on the triple diamond one. I have since used the standard model, but I've not really used the max draw equivalent from last year that much. But this one, as you look at it, it is evident that it is more aimed towards that draw bias. The toe of the club sits very high in the air, so it gives it that very upright feeling. It doesn't look really offset behind the golf ball. It looks pretty neutral, and it wasn't sort of one that, as you would put it down, bar the toe being up, you would say, oh, that is the drawer's driver. It wasn't wildly different to the Max model. One thing that did change between the two drivers of the Max and the Max D was that the profile of the driver, the back of the driver, really hugs the ground with the Max D one and gives you that sort of really forgiving look about the driver. Seems to feel like it's a bigger driver head. In terms again of the sound and the feel, a little bit of a duller sound. Felt really nice, this one, as I was hitting it. Felt a little bit more of a thuddy driver, not as tingy off the club face. And then flight wise, it was doing what it said on the package. The max draw, I was seeing some draws on this from other draw drivers that we see from other companies. This has to be the one that when I've tested it was just getting that draw. It was just going left. There was some shots that started out on target and were drawing, but there was quite a significant amount of draw, and I could see this being a driver that if you really struggle with a slice could probably go a long way to actually correcting some of that slice. It's not going to turn you into hitting perfect little draws every time, but I was seeing quite a lot of shape on it. For me, someone who, you know, used to be a drawer to hitting little fades, now it definitely had that bias towards it. Now when we get into the triple diamond driver, this is slightly different to the other two drivers. It's a slightly smaller head, so 450 cc's, gives it a more compact profile because it is aimed at the better player who likes that sort of small, sleek look about it. We don't want a head that is hugging the ground too much, so you can see the back of the driver sits up off the ground a little bit more than it would do from the Max to the Max D. It doesn't have the markings on top, it doesn't have that alignment, and overall just looks a little bit more robust, looks a little bit more sporty, it looks a bit more sleek, and you definitely feel that when you start to hit it and you hear the sound of it. It's got that real good solid thud to it. It's not too pingy, not almost like a frying pan sound that we saw some drivers from years back. It sounds real solid, like it's really packing a punch, and for me was by far the best feeling driver out of all three. I would say that the Max D came in second and the Max came in third in terms of the feel. In terms of flight, this was the one that I was skeptical about the most because last year I focused mainly on this driver in my review. It looks similar, bar obviously the blue colour. They've got it looking a little bit squarer to slightly more open, I think, personally, on my eye when I look at it. But the flights last year, you either nutted it and got a great driver, or you didn't quite catch it and you saw this thing dropping out of the air. But on initial testing, for me, when I put it down behind the golf ball, I loved the look of it. I was confident, and that followed on in to the driver flights. I almost felt like this should have been the most forgiving one because I felt that I was getting the most out of this driver. It was straight, it was long on the off-centered hits. I didn't see this diving flight that I was expecting, so maybe I held it a little bit more higher in esteem because I was expecting to see the dives. But even on a slightly toey shot or a slightly heeled shot, it was still staying up in the air, and it didn't seem drastically offline or too far back from the middled one, which was where this one really impressed me. So in terms of tech, and also another important factor, price, what has differed in the new Paradym AI Smoke? Well, firstly, let's talk price. And I'm happy to say that these drivers have actually come down in price compared to last year's model. These drivers have come in at £599 RRP, but I'm expecting to see these drivers, and what we've heard is that they're going to go into stores at around about £529. So last year we saw the drivers around the 649 mark and we're going into stores at 599. So we were at the top end of the £500 bracket last year, as we're now we're heading back towards the bottom end of that £500 bracket, which is great. Obviously things are getting more expensive, and if the price is coming down but we're still getting a good improved driver, excellent. In terms of what's changed in the club head, there actually are some differences, because it is the first time that we are not seeing jailbreak in a driver for many years now. For the viewer that doesn't know, jailbreak is a technology that with Callaway, one of their big things is they bought a supercomputer, an AI supercomputer, a few years back, and they designed this sort of frame, a bit like a wishbone, that sat behind the club face to help transfer energy across the face on mis-centered strikes to help you actually get a better performance on those misstrikes. But we're not seeing it in this line of drivers. Callaway have said though that it doesn't mean that we won't see it moving forwards. It's just not in these ones, because they have a new AI smart face. And what that means, with the help of the supercomputer and thousands of tests with real life golf swings, not just tour players, they've been able to create almost like hot spots across the face. And when you see the actual back of the club face now, it's not what we saw where we would almost see like a cylinder round the center and just getting wider. There's all different little spots around the face through thousands and thousands of golf swings to see where the golfer generally strikes the golf ball, which means on these off-centered strikes now, we're seeing better ball speeds, and we're seeing actually down range that the driver is getting a little bit tighter. We're going to test that a little bit ourselves though when we get to the data. We've also seen one of the things that was in Paradym, which was really raved about last year, the whole carbon structure, there being no titanium in part of the frame. They've gone back a little bit on that again, so they've added 15 grams of titanium into the structure, which means again, now they're able to move weight around the perimeter of the golf club and make the golf clubs more forgiving. And I think that's what we're going to see from a lot of golf clubs in this driver season. And remember to subscribe if you haven't for those other reviews, where forgiveness and dispersion is becoming more of the claim as opposed to loads and loads of distance. I think we've all sort of got aware that we're not going to be smashing it 399 yards now. We're actually looking for a club that we can still get distance and forgiveness with, which is where moving this weight around now is going to make these drivers a little bit more forgiving. The shapes have changed ever so slightly. They may not look that different from the other ones, but for me, I think that Paradym Max D, we see the toe being up, we see the head being stretched a little bit more. When we see the triple diamond, it's got that slightly fade bias shape. And then also in the Paradym, we're seeing a little bit of a change in shape and also keeping that weight plate in there that can be moved around to help again with this forgiveness story. Also in the Max Fast one, we're obviously seeing a lighter driver head, we're seeing a lighter shaft and a lighter grip, all in the aid to try and get that little bit more club head speed for the player that really needs it. But when you go for a fitting, you might see that driver introduced if you need it, as where you probably won't see many of those out on the high street when you go to the stores. So for me, initial signs are pretty good with this driver. We're seeing a slightly different look, and I thought last year I really liked the look of the Paradym, the blue and the gold, as where now when I have the AI Smoke in front of me and I see the slightly different colorway, even things like the head cover, I think it suits a little bit more. It fits in a little bit more with what we've seen in the past. And I do think I have to say I like this one a little bit more than I did in terms of looks. Technology wise, we are seeing some changes there from that jailbreak technology not being in the face and a little bit of that carbon structure changing. So early signs, and then what I saw out on the golf course were actually pretty decent. Max D doing what it said, triple diamond being more forgiving, and then the Max performing pretty much how I would expect it to. it's all looking pretty decent, but it's time to test these clubs with a little bit of data to see how they will perform. Are they any better than last year's? Are we seeing any standout changes? So let's head to the studio, hit some shots and find out how these drivers actually perform. So as we dive into the data, it's quite interesting. There's been a shot between two drivers and one's really stood out to me. If we look at the Max firstly, this one actually performed how I thought the Max D would be, because it was the shortest, 278 yards, and it was also the highest spinning for me. Obviously we have to take into account my misstrikes as a human, but for me, 278 yards of carry with a 2,774 spin average, I was expecting the Max D to be there. Now when we look at that one actually went a little bit further, 1 yard further, 279 yards of carry with 2,300 revs of spin, so a slightly lower spinning driver. Again, we have to account for strike, but one thing I was seeing, as I did see out on the golf course with this one, I was just seeing it go left. When I was hitting some shots, I thought, yeah, that's quite nice. It was flighted, it wasn't a diving hook, but it was getting out there, it was going left, and it was doing what it should do, it was drawing. As where the Paradym AI Smoke Max, that had a little bit of a tighter dispersion downrange. It was a little bit more consistent. If it was a toe, if it was a heel, if it was a good shot, they all seemed to be together a little bit more in the grouping. I wasn't seeing as much shape on those ones. It was set in neutral, it was set at its 9 degrees, as were all the drivers. And that's what I was seeing with that one. So a little bit more of a consistent in terms of fairway finding, but bear in mind, I wouldn't play the draw driver, but it was doing what it should. Then when we come to this one, the Triple Diamond, this is the driver that has really, really surprised me, because like I said, last year, it was unruly. I thought it was untamable. You had to be absolutely nutting it to get the most out of it, as where this one, we see that it was the mid spin for me, 2,458, and I hit this one pretty well. There was obviously some misstrikes in there, but its carry numbers were mega, 290 yards carry. Now, my club head speed did actually jump up a little bit with this one, and I think it's because I wasn't trying to hit it any harder. But as I looked down on this one, I felt so comfortable with it and I felt so confident with it, because I was seeing good flights out on the golf course. I was seeing it probably being the straightest of all the drivers, being the tightest of all dispersion of the drivers. I just had the confidence to swing with it, and I felt I was middling it more. I saw more yardage, I saw straighter shots, and this is the one that has really blown me away. Now, we have a couple of other driver reviews coming up later on in the week and into next week, but this one I think could be the driver that is going in my bag for this year, because I really liked last year's one and I was gutted I couldn't put it in, but it seems to be long and it seems to be forgiving and it seems to be the best looking thing I've seen as of yet. So for me, the Callaway Triple Diamond Paradym AI Smoke is the winner in all this personally for me. But overall, 3 very good drivers. As always, I would say go and test them, get a fitting to see which one you would fit in. If you are struggling for that slice, the Max D, it'd be interesting to see how people are going on with them out there. As always, remember to subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for the videos that we've got coming later out on the other driver reviews, and we'll see you in another one very soon.